Thank you very much for joining the live stream, and delighted to say that we have Mark Slade with us again. And Mark has got some brilliant charts that he's created, especially for this show, which he'll be talking us through in a minute. But I thought I'd begin, Mark. Well, first of all, welcome to the show, Mark. You okay?
Hello, Peter. Yeah, all good, thanks.
Yeah, good. What was your take on how it all ended yesterday with the 1 day to go today?
Yeah, well, I looked particularly at the long runs from the afternoon, and what stood out there was that the Mercedes, George Russell was super quick. It looked like, with good straight line speed. In contrast, Max, his pace was quite a bit slower. We're talking sort of 2 seconds on average, and he was significantly slower on the straight, sort of more than 10 Ks. But who knows what the differences are between the way they're running the cars. I mean, it could have been that Max was on more heavily used tyres. He could have had more fuel on board, because although if they're not doing pit stops actually into the box and back out again, then the teams could be changing fuel loads in the garage between runs. So it really is, without being there, it's very difficult to tell. Lewis was pretty quick, probably best of the rest, along with Oscar Piastri. But it was just noticeable that the Mercedes was super quick all the way through its run.
We've got a picture of Lewis on screen at the moment, and he's just going over the curbs. Looks like it's an entry thing where he's just going as wide as possible into the corner. And I know we've got one of the questions coming up saying Lewis seems to be taking wider entry lines than Charles Leclerc already. And you can see the inside front is, because of the angularity, it's slightly off the ground anyway. My point is, do you think these cars already look as if they can ride the curbs a little bit more than last year's cars?
I would have thought that would be the case, because the ride height sensitivity will be much reduced. And so the quickest way around the track will be to keep the tyres on the ground more of the time, and with less load on the cars as well, then softening the cars up both in heave and in roll is likely to give you better overall performance. So it wouldn't at all be surprising if they could ride the curves better now.
Mentioning McLaren, we got a picture of Oscar on camera now. He was quick, very quick yesterday, but I thought Lando's lap was more impressive in a way, because he seemed to be very slow down the pit straight, which is where they tend obviously to be running, I guess, a lot of power and be super quick. He wasn't mega quick there, but he was unbelievably quick sectors 2 and 3. And if you sort of merge the two laps of Oscar and Lando's overall lap was incredibly fast. And I don't know what that says about McLaren, whether they were doing that basically to come under the heading of sandbagging or what. But McLaren, I thought, looked very good yesterday around corners, into corners, out of corners, traction, all the things that, seem to be important, particularly with tyre management.
It may be that the team were doing something to give that performance, or it could be that it was the track conditions, such as the wind direction, that meant that Lando was slow on the straight in the morning and quicker in sectors 2 and 3. So, yeah, it's just difficult to tell, as always, with testing.
One surprise, maybe, is the pace of the Audi, and we've got Nico Hulkenberg on screen now, going pretty well. I mean, it's not a real surprise in the sense that we've known and loved Sauber for so many years, and we've got Jonathan Wheatley there obviously whipping everybody into shape. But nonetheless, their own engine, own gearbox, and obviously a new car. Quite impressive to see how quick Nico was yesterday.
Absolutely. Interestingly, and I'm not saying this is the case now, but Sauber often used to be quick in winter testing, and then you'd get to the first race and that would seem to disappear.
Yeah.
And they do have a bit of a history of that, for whatever reason. So, as I said, it's not necessarily the case they're doing anything unusual. Obviously, in those cases, it tended to be they would run lower fuel. But maybe they're just in a stronger position. I mean, as you say, it is an experienced team. Nico's excellent driver. And if Audi powertrains have got their act together, then there's no reason at all why they can't be putting forward a competitive package.
Well, I was going to ask you about Nico, because you've got a lot of experience with Nico. Tell me how good a person he is to have in that team, right? Good a driver to have in that team right now, the rebirth of the team, the rebooting of the team, the whole Audi thing. What's Nico's general raison d'etre? What is Nico all about?
He's a fantastic driver to have in the team. He's pretty chilled in terms of he's quite an amusing guy. He is very, very driven by the technical aspects of the car. He very definitely wants the car to behave in a good way. He was sometimes accused by some people of being overly critical in that he rarely had anything positive to say, shall we say, about the car. But I never minded that, because at the end of it, you don't want to talk about the things that are good so much. Depends on the context, obviously, but what you want to know is what isn't so great about the car and what he isn't happy with. And he was very good at focusing your mind on those things. And with Nico, I mean, he is a really, really good driver. I can't understate how good he is in the car. And so he was one of those guys that you took seriously. But he did push. He pushed hard. And you had to put the hours in. You had to put the work in and make it better. And he could be quite hard to convince about things as well. And he'd want a detailed, explanation of why you thought something was good or not good. And he would sort of play out devil's advocate on it from time to time. So I enjoyed discussing things with him, because he's an intelligent guy and he does a really good job. He's really thoughtful. So I think
speaks perfect English. He's multilingual, and being German, of course, a great interface for Audi. But 38 years old, is that an issue at all with Nico?
I haven't seen it yet. I mean, last year I thought he drove exceptionally well sometimes. I mean, inevitably, as drivers get older, I think their qualifying pace ultimately drops off, because the reactions do dull slightly and they get a little bit more safety conscious, shall we say. But there's been Nico, and he's still hungry. I think he's one who he hasn't had the success that his talent and his sort of personality should have had. So we'll see. He, certainly at Alpine, I think his last year, and he admitted it to me in 2019 up against Daniel, he felt a little bit miffed. I think that Daniel had been brought in and he was a bit tired of making up the numbers, and I think he did drop off that year once things got a bit sticky. But when he was given his chance to come back with Haas, he was how I remembered when he joined Renault in 2017. He was absolutely full on, and he was driving brilliantly well, and he really, he gave Kevin a really hard time. So as long as he's still in that frame of mind, and I'm sure he is right now, because it's a new challenge. I think he likes a new challenge. I think he'll do really, really well.
So that takes us on kind of to Fernando Alonso at Aston Martin. What is going on there? And I mean, I guess we all have to say now, officially they are off the pace and they are in trouble.
It really does seem to be the case. Obviously, we don't know the ins and outs of it. It sounds like it's mainly a power unit issue in terms of lack of power. Potentially, I guess, and this is me just speculating, struggling with the recovery side of things. I guess I heard some stories also that there were some cooling issues with the car, which again doesn't surprise me, because we'll push those to the absolute limit. I think it's absolutely necessary to get to where you need to be. It's a shame for Fernando, because the clock is ticking with his career, obviously. But in many ways, I'm not entirely surprised. I think with Honda, they've had Red Bull as a very strong partner for the last few years, and Red Bull weren't just a customer of the engine. I think they contributed significantly to the performance of the Honda power unit through control systems and through their guidance. And I suspect that for Aston Martin, it's a bit of a shock. They're probably not used to having to provide support to the engine manufacturer, and Honda also, I mean, they dropped out, didn't they? They weren't going to be in Formula One, and then they seemed to change their minds and come back. And that period when they weren't planning on coming into being in Formula One, it must have had some effect on the department. So I think they're a bit on the back foot. Having said all that, I believe that, shall we say, in 3 years' time, that engine will be absolutely as good as any of the others. But unfortunately, at this point, Aston Martin are having to deal with probably a car that's much more complicated than they previously had to deal with. new regs which Adrian's pushed to the limit, so there might be some things that aren't quite where they need to be because he's pushed it so hard, and a power unit that is struggling a bit. I hope that they do a better job than McLaren did when they had Honda back in 2015 and 16, in that they work positively with Honda to fix the problems, because that's what they need to do. And they need to have faith in the long term. But obviously for Fernando, I think that's really difficult because he doesn't really have a long term.
It obviously is for him. But just going back over a little bit of what you were saying there, I mean, bear in mind, Adrian now is the team principal. And so you could argue that there's no excuse for the team not knowing how complicated, if that indeed is an issue, the car was going to be. I mean, it's not as if he's just joined there. He's been around for quite a long time at Aston Martin already now. He is the team principal. So that infrastructure should have been set up in the course of 2025. Yeah. And from an engine power unit perspective, you got Andy Cowell there, who was the main man at Mercedes Powertrain for all these years. And on the assumption that they don't have, for example, the compression ratio advantage, you'd have to ask, what has Andy Cowell been doing? Why wouldn't he have known about that? Why wouldn't he have insisted upon that with Honda? Because if any company in the world is able to adapt a clever idea like that, it's going to be Honda. I mean, that's what they do. They copy other people, to put it bluntly. And I'm amazed, if that's the case, that Andy Cowell hasn't managed to get that through. And maybe that's one of the reasons he was moved sideways anyway. I don't know. Maybe it was that triggered it. But again, going back to the Adrian point, it seems odd to me that, obviously it was a shock for them to go from Mercedes to Honda, but it's not as if Adrian doesn't know how Honda work and what they need and how they need to be run either. He does. And that's one of the great things that he was taking to the team, in my opinion. And none of that seems to be happening. And I don't know whether there's, above Adrian, there's still some sort of management mess that makes it very difficult for things to be done cleanly and clearly, or whether it's just all together and nobody would get all the balls in the air at the same time. I don't know. I just want to finish one other point, and that is that there is a great history of motorsport. And you can probably think of examples as well of money buying everything, the best of everything, and putting it all together, and it never actually works. And the first real example of that was a thing called the Super Team in America, which was Viceroy Cigarettes and Vel Millicet. And he had Mario Andretti and Maurice Philippe doing the design, and Al Unser, all the best he could get. And the car was a disaster. Everything was a disaster. And then the other more modern one, of course, is BAR. They threw all the money in the world at it, all the best people they could get, the reigning world champion, the whole thing, grew organically. And that's, Stroll has come in with money is no object. We get Honda, and base to the whole operation.
I think that's probably true. And I think that was what Will did very well, because I think they... and I think, presumably, Christian Horner had a lot to do with it. I don't know. But I was very impressed, at the time, how well they moulded that team around Adrian and got the most out of him, while also dealing with all the other issues that need to be dealt with. Adrian Newey as team principal is quite a strange situation to have. And he's already, I think there have already been statements from Aston Martin how the responsibility for dealing with the Honda are being delegated. And that isn't any surprise. Adrian is completely fixated on performance. And his modus operandi at McLaren was always, this is what we need to do. And everyone would say, oh, we can't do that. It's too much. And he's like, I'm not interested in that. Your job is to go away and fix and do what I want done. And it's not my problem to expect it to be done. And I think the gist of their operation from tense was to work in the way that was successful. And I don't think other people appreciate just how much effort that took.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I've often said that people talk about Christian Horner as a great team principal or not a great team principal. The reality is, running a team in a sort of long way, or indeed Andrea Stella, isn't that complicated. It's a very difficult job, and not that many people in the world who can do it. But there are people up and down the pit lane. But running a team in which you're keeping Adrian Newey happy and getting the best from Adrian for a long period of time, that is something else. That's something that Frank Williams was not able to do. It's something Ron Dennis was not able to do in the long run.
Exactly.
In the same way he wasn't able to do it with John Barnard.
Yeah.
And that was Christian's thing, that he understood the importance, of getting Red Bull to finance Adrian, which was a big leap of faith in that, who is this guy? Oh, it's an engineer. You want to pay him all this money? And anyway, he persuaded Red Bull to do it. And then he kept the whole thing going.
Yeah.
And, it's not happening now. Having said that, of course, Adrian left under Christian's watch. So you can't, it wasn't perfect, that's for sure. It obviously fell apart at the end. But right now, it's, it's with him as team principal, it's a very, very strange situation now in which they find themselves. And of course, the other point is that Fernando's relationship with Honda isn't exactly.
No, and he has a problem, creates his own problem with some of the way he deals with things. I mean, he's Fernando in terms of he just wants to go fast and beat everybody. And he is just incredibly driven, but with that comes some lack of subtlety. And with Honda, you need a high level of subtlety, and they can be very frustrating to deal with. But some of the guys used to tell me about how difficult things could be, but their resource level was phenomenal. And once they got, they understood what the problems were, they would put so much effort into it and they would come up with a solution. But it wouldn't necessarily be a particularly efficient way of coming to a solution. They'd kind of throw absolutely everything at it, try 10 different things, and one of them would work, and that's the one they'd go down. And that is a bit of a problem as well, both with the Honda approach and I think to some extent the Adrian approach in these cost cap days, where you can't just throw lots and lots of money at things because it's too expensive and it will hurt you. So I think that could be a bit of an issue for Aston Martin as well. But having said all that, well, there's a chap's left Red Bull, hasn't he? The chief designer. We don't know why he's left and we don't know where he's going, but it would be hugely surprising if he was to turn up at Aston Martin. Because he's exactly the sort of person that Adrian would want, a trusted lieutenant to deal with things that he doesn't want to deal with, in the same way that Peter Prodromou, who was head of aero at McLaren, left McLaren to go back to Red Bull to be effectively Adrian's right-hand man. So maybe that's a step in the right direction. But so I think if Aston Martin are serious about it, and obviously having spent the money they should be, but it will take an amount of time. It just will. But if you give it the time it needs and you get the team around Adrian that he requires, it will be successful. But there's a list there.
I'm sure that's right. But you mentioned a time frame of 3 years. I mean, that's far too long. I mean, let's think British Grand Prix this year. Where do you think Aston Honda will be?
I think it will be difficult for them to get better than midfield.
Wow.
Given their current performance. Just because it is, once the season kicks off, it's really hard to make good progress. And I suspect with Aston Martin, there are some structural issues within the team. So we already heard some comments about their wind tunnel not being necessarily what Adrian was expecting, their simulation department not being as high level as Red Bull's. And none of those things would be surprising. So that's why it is a long-term project, because to get all those things up to a high standard does take time. You need different people, you need resources, you need money. It is a very hard thing. The situation, the level that Red Bull and McLaren and, shall we say, Mercedes, not so much Ferrari, to be honest, recently, the level they're at is incredibly high. It's incredibly difficult to get to where they are. And if Aston Martin thought it was going to be easy to get to that level and it was just a matter of money, they're sorely mistaken. I think they can do it, but it's going to be hard work.
Yeah. I think, well, I mean, from a Fernando Alonso perspective, it's a disaster if that's the case, if it's going to take that long, because as his career definitely isn't going to go on forever from this point onwards. And that's an issue. I mean, one of the things that always surprised me, I don't know whether you know him, was how they moved Tom McCullough sideways soon after Andy Cowell joined the team. And he's now effectively being wasted looking at future projects or something. I mean, he's a good racer on the ground. In fact, talking about Nico Hulkenberg, he was engineering Nico when he got the pole in Brazil for Williams.
Right.
Good
Okay.
man, background in
Yeah.
Sauber and
Yeah.
been with effectively Force India for a long time, which means this team. And they just moved him sideways. There's a waste of people as well and personnel. And I'm surprised that that Adrian hasn't brought him back. Maybe I'm guilty of misjudging Adrian. For me, he's always been on the cutting edge of design in the way that Colin Chapman was in the Lotus era. But yeah, you're right. We've only ever really seen him in eras where there's been a relative freedom in terms of design and finance. But now in this new era, with all these other things coming together, maybe it's just too suffocating for a guy like Adrian to do what he can do.
I think it could be a problem because of his approach, which is absolutely 100% commitment to the best possible solution.
Yeah.
Almost pushing it. He tended to push things a bit too far and then come back to where you needed to be rather than hitting, shall we say, under hitting something. Because I think he felt that was the way you got to the solution quickest. But I am a bit worried that isn't entirely compatible with the current cost regulations.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get on to some questions now and comments. I'd just like, as off the bat, to thank those recently joined as members of the channel as well. Brilliant to have your support and so much support already in this very early stage of that program. But big thanks to S. Jultra, to Scoochie4, CM6847, Harvard Gendem 6, Chris Cram, and Jared. Thank you very much indeed. Question from Ronnie Way, F4R. Hi, Peter and Mark. Harnessing the energy and deployment seems to be the main areas for this new generation of cars. What kind of batteries are being used, and does it negate touch and feel? Well, in terms of I know that's more your scene, Mark, and we're going to get on to your brilliant graphs right now, because it's a good segue to that. But in terms of batteries, next Wednesday, we do have Gavin White from About Energy live on the show. And he's a battery man, and he's a battery man as they relate to Formula One. So if all the questions you've got about batteries, please have a look at that. But Mark, I'm going to put on screen kind of to answer initially where we're at, the first of the two charts that you've created, which is the electrical power available for standard and override modes versus car speed. Very impressive. We've got lots of green there, not much red, but looks impressive.
It's very simple. It just comes from the rules that the FIA published about what power output you're allowed from the MGUK. And I just thought it was worth showing everybody what the override mode actually means. And you can see that the FIA state that the electrical power, remember, you've got the ICE below this, so you've got your 530 horsepower or 450 kilowatts roughly, that's pushing the car along. But on top of this, you have this MGUK electrical energy. But the FIA say that power drops off with speed. And then you've got the override mode, which is the red area, which shows how when you have override mode, the power available is extended to a higher speed, although it then still drops off at up to 355 kilometers an hour. So there is a region where you have substantially more power available than the car in standard mode. And that is the new way of overtaking on the straights. That's effectively what is replacing DRS in terms of giving one car a differential over the other. There's a second chart,
which we
which
should get onto that now.
just basically shows the difference between the two. So there is a peak power difference of 225 kilowatts, which is well over 300 horsepower in imperial numbers, which is obviously a huge difference in power, but it is only for a limited speed range. So it's actually the area under the curve that is the important thing. And the other thing to remember is this is car speed related. So if you have straights where the cars aren't getting to these speeds, then you're not going to have the big differential in power available. And just looking at the speeds yesterday, we had Max Verstappen doing 302, 303 kilometers an hour on his long run, and George Russell doing sort of 315. So they're actually at those speeds well below this region of extra power. So to be able to get the car up to 345 plus kilometers an hour is quite a big ask. And obviously there are going to be some circuits like Monaco where you never get anywhere close to this. So this isn't going to help overtaking at all. And remember that you can only get this mode the second lap. So you have to get within, it's roughly a second, although the FIA apparently can change that. But you have to get within a second of someone to be allowed to generate more electrical power storage, such that you can then deploy this mode on the subsequent lap. So that has a level of complication as well. So anyway, we'll see. But I thought it was just interesting just to put visually the difference between those two modes.
You were talking in the previous live stream about how it's important to have the rear axle as light as possible. Would that apply in terms of power regen? Would that apply to Monaco as well?
Well, what I meant by that was that you need to be getting the most possible regeneration from the rear axle. So you're putting a lot of demand on the rear axle. And that's going to apply everywhere because the cars have, in standard mode, around 8.5 megajoules of recovery available, and that's quite hard to achieve. So you at every circuit, to get the most performance out of the car, you'll need to recover as much energy as you possibly can. It's going to be difficult to recover all the energy you need, all the energy that you're allowed to. One of your viewers actually commented after the last post and made a very good point, and maybe what I was saying was slightly confused, in that you will need to get the maximum grip possible from the rear axle to allow for as hard a braking as possible, and so that you can put the brake balance as far rearward as possible. So for the driver, it should feel neutral, but to have the maximum rear grip, when you get to the middle of the corner, once you've released the brakes, the car will then tend to understeer very badly, because you're going to maximize the rear grip. So the car should feel on the edge of neutrality under braking, because that's the maximum performance of the rear. But when you get to the mid-corner and you come off the brakes, the car is going to tend to understeer quite badly initially, because it's been set up for maximum rear grip initially. And the comments about snappiness that some drivers have apparently made is probably going to come because when they're getting on the throttle, they will have quite a lot of steering lock applied, and the tendency is for the car to snatch, to oversteer after having sat with understeer for a long period of time. So I think maybe the explanation I gave last time was difficult to understand, but that's the reality of where these cars are. I
think it was correct, and I think you've just gone a little bit deeper now. And the reality, when we say guys like Max are very good at managing risk, of course, they're very good at minimizing the understeer when you are loading the front like that, and they have a very good feel for brake pedal pressure, whether it be release or front. That's one of the things they do so well with their footwork. Whether you're balancing the car that way or whether, and that's what it means by living with unstable rear in effect, because you've got understeer suddenly, you've got more steering lock on and the back end can anticipate that. That is what it's all about. It's not a reflex thing of reacting to it, because that's what Carlos Sainz and those guys do really well. The Max is another level to the point where they test it, and that's how they've been able to work for them, I think. Susan Bold has just joined as a member as well. Thank you very much indeed. So Sarosh Soman's a member too. Thank you very much, Sarosh. Your question is just about notes on drivers. Leclerc and Max seem to be driving beautifully in the Bahrain Test. Leclerc seems to be even shorter and early into the corners than Max, but Lewis is still turning in very late. Any observations that have caught your attention overall? Well, the only thing that I would say is that whole business that they seem to be using more of what used to be called a transitory curve, where you sort of move to the left before a right-hander and you try to give yourself as wide a possible approach, and you're going up on the curbs on the entry to the corner. They seem to be doing that more than last year, but not necessarily Leclerc and Max when they're really on it, whereas I think Lewis is quite enjoying that. And I think Lewis is quite enjoying the feeling of sort of quite a lot of power mid-corner and a bit of power oversteer on exit. And that's what he does very well. He's, like all drivers, he's very good at that. But whether or not he's going to be able to match Charles going into corners is another matter. I don't know what your take is, Mark. Oh, looks like we just lost Mark as well.
He's really sorry about that.
Don't worry, mate.
The dog went absolutely mental.
Ah.
I had to run off to get a delivery and to shut her up. And when I came back, it had dropped.
So let's keep you, if you can just sit on we'll do the audio. There's a question from Aaron saying, will the drivers be pressing the buttons on the steering wheel much more than last year? If so, to what extent would this impact concentration and dexterity required for actual steering wheel input?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there's a limited number of functions on the steering wheel, and difficult to know what might be different this year. But in terms of the way they'd be managing engine braking, etc., I think it's going to be very similar.
Okay, good. Orkan Stasas, thank you very much. Also a member. Morning from New York. Hi there. Hope you're having a nice morning there. Very curious about Ferrari's rear wing exhaust double diffuser in inverted commas. As explained by Scarbs in the video yesterday, is it possible that this combo could cause lift? How significant would that be? I would hope it isn't going to cause lift, that's for sure. But, what do you reckon, Mark? You don't want lift.
No, it's just going to be better efficiency. Either by flow control to help the rear wing and the diffuser, or by generating a little bit of downforce itself. So whatever they've done, they obviously think that they can get better efficiency with that setup. So it'll just be something they've worked on, and that's what it'll be giving them.
Jez James says, hi Peter, how many languages can you speak? I heard that Frank Williams could learn a language just by quickly flicking through a language book. I can speak English, Australian, a bit of American. I've got a spattering, a small amount of French, small amount of Italian, and a little bit of Spanish, and I kind of mix them all together. Nobody understands a word, so there you go. Frank Williams, I don't ever remember him looking at a language book or studying languages. He just used to go to the place and talk, and it all happened. And seriously, I'm not joking. When he was out courting the Arabs in 1977, 78, he would go to Riyadh for sort of 3 weeks in a row, and he would come back speaking pretty good Arabic. That's how good Frank was. That's how good his ear was for languages. Just superb. Italian, French, a bit of German, English. Yeah, Frank was outstanding in that area. Jez James again. I think my preferred emergency ambulance driver would be Ari Vatanen, I guess you mean, over Gilles Villeneuve. Only given I've seen Ari's driving up close in the Welsh forests. Okay, yeah, you do mean Ari Vatanen. Yeah, Ari is very good, isn't he? Wow, just superb. And lovely guy too. What a shame he never made it to be FIA president. It would have been a very different sport today. In fact, if he had made it to FIA president, I venture to suggest that we wouldn't have Formula E as we know it. We wouldn't have Formula One as we know it. Formula One would still probably be very spectacular V8, V10 engines, internal combustion engines, normal engines, burning fuel and rubber and everything else. And we would have an electric category of racing within the Formula One envelope, which was run over Grand Prix weekends, which the teams supplied development to, and some of the drivers actually competed in, Formula One drivers that in, and we'd have a much more logical setup. I think that would have happened if Ari had become president instead of Jean Todt. Anyway, it's just my opinion. Jez again says, I think it's pretty sad that today's turbocharged Formula One engines sound nothing like Formula One turbos of the 85, 86, 87 seasons, i.e. no flames or explosions on each gear change that make one's hair stand on end. Why is this? And can we not get some more explosions, please, Mark?
It's just down to efficiency, isn't it, ultimately? And the fact that the fuel is limited and the teams want to make the absolute best possible use of it. So unfortunately, that means not wasting it with flames and loud noises, sadly. But that's efficiency for you. Quite dull, isn't
it? Agreed. Philip Anderson. Hi, Peter and Mark. Quite sure I understand this question. You probably do, Mark. What does, and then in quotes, wow, how did he do that? Question mark, end of quotes. Look like on the pit wall from the perspective of a race engineer? Could it be simple entry and exit speeds, etc.?
I think it's more when we used to have that sort of comment, it would be because we knew what the performance level of the car was, and then the driver would pull out something that you just thought, based on everything you'd seen up to that moment, wasn't possible. And the biggest one I remember was Mika getting pole position in Monaco in 1999, because we had been consistently 3 or 4 tenths off the pace of Michael. And then on his last run in qualifying, Mika went out and just did something that we thought was impossible and pulled off a lap and got pole position. So it's not so much, you don't necessarily see it in terms of controls. You just know that he's done something well beyond what the expected capability was in the moment. I would say that's something that Mika did more often than most. He had another level, and we used to say when the force was with him, he could do the most amazing things. Take it to say another level. But if you looked at the telemetry, you would just see very subtle differences in throttle, brake, steering, and it wouldn't look amazing. But what is amazing is how they channel that, to the car, how they become part of the car and are able to put those very, very fine adjustments into their driving that achieve those remarkable results.
That year with the pole at Monaco, was that not the year when he really hated doing it, but didn't he actually hold himself back a little bit through sector 1 in order to make sure the tyres were perfect sectors 2 and 3? Or was that a different year when he got the pole?
He got pole in 98 and in 99.
Yeah.
I seem to remember that the 98 pole was the more measured.
Yeah, I think it was the 98 one, yeah.
Whereas in 99, he had been struggling generally with the understeer that you always get at Monaco. And he just hadn't been able to tune the car in. And then he just managed to find within himself the ability to get the car rotated by being probably a bit more aggressive with the steering. But I think 98 was the more measured, thoughtful one. But I may be wrong. To be honest, it's so long ago. I'm dead impressed that you can remember that sort of thing, because I'm afraid I struggle.
Yeah, I remember at the time thinking that was very, very unlike Mika to be so thoughtful about the lap when the adrenaline was up and it was, the last pole lap. But yeah, I think it was 98 in reflection. Zavij Dugout says, watching the 07 to 9 seasons, it's wild to see Lewis's development as a driver, from burning his tyres and doing crazy moves to becoming a more complete driver. But his point is this, but Robert Kubica was also pretty good. What do you think? Who do you think was better at that point, Kubica or Lewis? I mean, you obviously knew Lewis pretty well at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the opposite side of the table from Robert in 2010 at Renault. I would say ultimately Lewis was the best at around that time. He was just astonishingly good with a car, and it was astonishingly good from the point of view of making use of a car that may not have, car and tyres that may not have been fantastic. I mean, I think I said before, we used to do long runs, and Heikki and Lewis would start off at a similar lap time. This was in 2008, 2009, And by the end of the run, Hakey'd be a second lap slower. And when the cars came back to the garage, Hakey's tyres would be in much better shape than Lewis's. And you just wondered how he was capable of doing it. Robert, from what I remember, he obviously, we never had a direct comparison. He was very, very good, but I don't know. I didn't feel that he had quite that superlative level of control that Lewis did. But that might just be because he was being compared with Vitaly Petrov in that year.
Yeah.
So sadly, it would be difficult to make it to compare anybody against that. I know I said Nico was one of the drivers who missed out on the results he should have had, or has so far missed out on the results he should have had. I think it's fair to say that Robert Kubica was another one who definitely should have achieved a lot more than he ultimately did.
I remember when Lewis first went to Turkey in a Formula One car, that, was it turn 9? Is it that 4 apex left-handed?
Yeah.
He was not doing anything other than just going through that unbelievably quickly. And the tyres, as far as I could see, the tyres just couldn't take it. He was just putting so much energy through the tyres that they were kind of going off just because he was so quick through that corner.
We actually had a failure, didn't he?
Yeah.
It was in the race was that 2009 when the left front failed? The inside shoulder just gave up because it was being overworked.
But not overworked from sliding or doing anything messy. It was just the amount of energy and pace he was putting through the tyres. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Level. Yeah. I don't. Having worked with a number of excellent drivers, I don't think the level that Lewis was operating at in 2007, 8, 9 should be underestimated.
No.
His achievements were absolutely outstanding.
Yeah. Particularly his first year, really, alongside Fernando, you got to say. I mean, just brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think
stunning.
Having Fernando in the other car drove him to that level. That they both drove at an absolutely unbelievable level. I don't think anyone else could have matched those two that year. And actual fact, I think Lewis, although Lewis was fabulous in 2008 against Hakey, I do wonder if Fernando had still been in the car, I think he'd have been even better. Those two, the level of competition between those two in that year was so intense. It was amazing to be part of.
If only you guys at McLaren had given Fernando equal material and equal car. Imagine. Oh, well, Fernando said he's going to tell all when the book comes out after he retires.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah. I think Fernando is fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed working with him. But some of the things he says, I do. He once said to me that he just used to say deliberately obtuse and wrong things to journalists just to see how they'd react. and
nothing wrong with that. That's quite cool, actually. I think. Isn't it?
But all I would say is his perspective on things will be his perspective on things.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. There's a question about your old team, Mark. Rupesh says, I think Alpine are going to do really well this year, maybe even number 5 in the Constructors' Championship. He says, do you agree, Peter? But I'm going to throw this one straight over to you. I think
they should be number 5, shouldn't they?
Well, they should be. They should be. I mean, Steve Nilsson's there. He's a good guy. I mean, he's still got the flab factor, which is obviously an issue. But I mean, how many other guys are there from your era that you would count? You would say, yeah, he's a good bloke. Well, not a good bloke. He's a good aerodynamic engineer or whatever. How many are there from that era still?
I honestly don't know. To be honest, I think they had They suffered a big loss of people at the end of the sort of Kimi Lotus period because of the money drain. And they've struggled to, particularly I would say on the aero side, I think they've struggled to get back to the level that they were at. Some of it is because the resource level that they had at that time was very good, but then it didn't get developed because of the money side of things. So it's difficult to say the level that they're at in comparison now. It definitely did suffer. But the fact that they've got the Mercedes engine, which is going to be strong, and they've got Certainly in Pierre Gasly, I think he's an excellent driver. I think he's capable of driving a good car very, very well. Whether he's capable of pulling a team up, I don't know, because I haven't worked with him, so it's difficult to say. They've got Kyron Pilbeam there. He's a really strong engineer, very practical. They've got Carol Luce, who was the other race engineer when I was there. I think he's in charge of sort of part of the simulation and development area. The other race engineers are very strong, so they are fundamentally a good team. Rob Cherry, the team manager, I think, or sporting director now, he's a fantastic guy. Jason Milligan, the number one, the chief mechanic, he's brilliant. So they have a lot of brilliant people, but whether they're able to pull back from the depths of a few years back, it's not easy. As I said before, with the level that Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes are operating at is phenomenally high, and it's difficult to get there. But they should be number 5, really, because at least because they've got a Mercedes engine. So as long as they come up with a good enough car, it should put them in a strong position.
Honda have released a statement in Bahrain this morning, which KBNDZ says, what are your thoughts regarding this statement? Is this all a complete mess? And the statement says, Mark, kind of you were touching on it already, Honda's released a statement and confirmed that only very limited and short stints will be completed on Friday. Our last run with Fernando Alonso on Thursday showed a battery-related issue that impacted our test plan with the Aston Martin Formula One team, blah, blah, blah. Since then, we've been carrying out simulations on the test bench in Sakura, Japan. Due to this and a shortage of power unit parts, we've adapted today's run plan to be very limited and to consist only of short stints.
Yeah.
Not very good, is it?
That's really bad.
That's terrible.
No, but it means that they've highlighted a major issue, which is going to prevent them doing the long runs, and they're just trying to get the most out of it, but they just haven't got there's no way, obviously, it's such a serious problem they can't fix it in the short term. It's a desperate situation to get into, but they just need to knuckle down and move forwards and get on with it. So hopefully they will.
Are the batteries all made by the power unit suppliers these days?
No, it'll be...
Is it an FIA thing?
It's company.
But it's not an FIA controlled thing though, right? Or is it?
No, they can have batteries made by any company they choose, but they have to make that supply non-exclusive, as I understand it. So they have to get FIA approval, shall we say, or certification of that supplier, and that supplier can't be signed up to an exclusive contract. What is interesting is that McLaren used to make the batteries for Honda even when McLaren no longer had Honda power units, because that's how it had evolved in 2015 and 16. So when Red Bull were running Honda engines, they were actually using McLaren-made batteries, whilst McLaren had to use the batteries supplied by Renault and latterly Mercedes.
And was that McLaren or McLaren? Sorry, was that McLaren or McLaren Electronics?
McLaren Electronics, yeah. But that was one of the reasons why McLaren dropped Renault as a supplier. One of the reasons was that the battery made for the Renault engine was significantly heavier than the batteries that McLaren were making for Honda. And so they knew they could do a lot better in that respect. But yeah.
But still, when you look at that period of the desperate period Honda had with McLaren, and then going to Red Bull and Milton Keynes Red Bull powertrain, a lot of control then over what Honda were doing, and they very quickly knocked them into shape, and Adrian was there. It's still astounding to me that Adrian hasn't managed to do that with the change to Aston Martin. It's absolutely astonishing to me that he wouldn't have known all of the shortcomings that would happen with Honda unless you do this or do that. This is what we had to do. This is a bad habit they got into, whatever it was, and wouldn't immediately have brought that over to Aston Martin. But it looks, at the moment, the Honda appearance in Formula One, reappearance, appears to be no better than it was in the last McLaren era.
But it's quite possible, because that was the third year of Honda's involvement in hybrid engines.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite possible that engine would have been very good if McLaren had stuck with them for a third year. We'll never know.
Yeah.
So it might be that Red Bull benefited from the 2 previous years of development.
Yeah.
Whereas now, and it does lead me to wonder if, just in this specific instance that you previously mentioned, have Honda had to change supplier of their batteries from McLaren to another company? Maybe that's why they are now struggling with their batteries, because that change has been made. It's quite likely, I would have thought, in the circumstances. So in some ways, Honda have gone back to a sort of start position more so than Ferrari and Mercedes have. And so you might want to say they're more equivalent to Audi, but then you could say they're more equivalent to Ford. But then I think Red Bull, have had a huge input into that Ford program and have made use of their expertise and knowledge that they developed working with Honda has now been put into that Ford program. I think the benefit of Red Bull into Honda's program is probably underestimated. I think they have some
earlier.
And they were very early into the full car dyno side of things, which is just massively beneficial to developing that side of the powertrain. I think it's interesting now to see how things are playing out and to reflect on what that meant for the previous years in terms of who was doing what.
Well, we'll do some investigative work as much as we can to see who's building the batteries for all the teams. It would be very interesting to know how that's panned out, isn't it? Yeah, and we'll ask Gavin White that next week when he's on, but whether or not A, he knows all that, and B, he's allowed to say it anyway, are 2 different questions, given the world of secrecy in which we live in Formula One. But I mean, I'm from the era when the editor of Autocourse would send out a form to the technical director of every Formula One team wanting to know exactly who built every part on the car, and they were all filled in perfectly, and they went out for Autocourse at the end of the year. But you do that today and nothing will happen at all, of course. Oh, it's a technical part. It's about as much as you would get. We're going to have to wind this up fairly soon, but another question from Alessandra Durango, another regular. Hi, Peter and Mark. Looks like in override mode, you also have an advantage when it comes to harvesting. Could you share more details about the override mode?
All that you're allowed to do is when you get override mode, on the first lap, you are allowed to recover more energy so that you can deploy it on the subsequent lap. So it's all part of the same thing. You can deploy that extra power around the whole lap. It isn't restricted to when you have the override in terms of the extra power available. So if there was a particular moment when maybe the driver ahead makes a mistake, the driver with that extra energy could use it in a different part of the lap, but it's likely they'll want to restrict it to the straight line to just maximise that overtaking opportunity. But yeah, it's part of the same thing. So you're allowed to recover more energy during the lap, and then you're allowed to deploy more energy on the following lap.
Right. Gotcha. Here's a pretty specific question about your time at Haas, Mark, from Miran DD9. Mark, what happened with the Haas update late in 24 that brought Kevin back to Nico's pace? Aero balance? Less oversteery car? Question mark.
Basically, it was aeroelastic front wing. We were actually behind the curve on that, partly because of the nature of how that team has to operate in terms of parts supply. But we got a much better performing front wing for the Dutch Grand Prix. But unfortunately, Kevin broke one, and then I think Nico broke one the following day, and we were short of parts, which meant that it was allocated. At that time, Nico was having more success, so in a fairly blunt but realistic assessment, more the remaining parts were given to Nico. So Kevin had to struggle along with the less good parts for a few races until we built up our supply to the point where it made a difference. As it happens, one of the following races was Monza, where the aeroelastic effect was minimal because the loading on the wing was small, so there wasn't actually a huge performance benefit. But in Singapore, when we're back to maximum downforce, it became apparent that difference was very significant. In actual fact, then we had, I think, Ollie had to do one race while Kevin was suspended and did a very good job despite not having the same front wing availability. And then when Kevin got the chance to run the new front wing in Austin, all of a sudden he was back on the pace again. So it did just demonstrate how influential those things can be.
Lots of comments coming in about it's the end of Aston Martin. Aston Martin's finished. They are so over. After Barcelona, I was still hopeful for Aston. Now I've lost all hope. Not good. And it comes back to that business of, money doesn't buy everything. It creates a lot of opportunity, but ultimately there's nothing to beat painstaking organic growth over a period of time and going through the heartache and trying to get the best of everything and putting it all together in one big melting pot often does end in tears. And I wonder, all the Aston Martin fans out there, who I guess there are some, and Fernando fans, there are lots, will be thinking this is horrendous. Imagine how the Strolls are feeling right now. The amount of money they've spent, the amount of energy they put into this whole thing. And even today, a press release came out from from the team saying, aren't we wonderful? We've just bought in perpetuity the rights to the name Aston Martin as a Formula One team. On the same day that Honda are putting out a press release saying that we're not going to do any long runs today because the engine's so bad. I mean, it's looking terrible from every aspect. Anyway, we won't drone on about that. We can talk about it more, obviously, over the next couple of weeks. But Creative Expression says, do you feel like with this set of rule changes, the race starts are the most dangerous at any time of any rule changes in our lifetime? What are your thoughts, again, on the race starts, Mark? We've had Andrea Stella saying that they're very dangerous. We've had a few attempts at starts during the test, and they've gone reasonably well, not too bad. But do you think specific changes will need to be brought in before the Australian Grand Prix?
I suspect that it's really a question of the teams and drivers getting used to the new situation, and I suspect that they'll adapt pretty rapidly to that. It sounds like it is going to be more difficult because of the nature of these engines with not having the electrical assistance to get the car off the line. So it's going to be a bit more unpredictable. But I'd be quite surprised if it's as big a deal as seems to be being made out. There may be aspects that I don't understand. I'm slightly concerned that Ferrari were ahead of the curve and have done a better job, and that the other teams are trying to peg that back a little bit by trying to get the FIA to make changes that are suitable for people who maybe haven't done as good a job. But standing starts are somewhat dangerous. I think we've been in an era where the cars have made it slightly more predictable than it has been in previous generations, but isn't that part of the sport? And I know it's easy to say that until someone gets hurt in an accident, but I don't know. I think the rules are what they are. The teams have to make the best use of them, and the teams that have done the better job should be allowed to reap the rewards from that in the short term.
And let's just hope nothing bad happens at the starts this year. That's all we can say. Until we see it, we're not going to know, are we? More comments coming in about Honda. It'll be a miracle if they finish one Grand Prix. Honda have let Aston down. Alonso never gets a break, says Bad Boy. And then an interesting question. Miran again. Hi, Mark. Why weren't you on the pit wall in Abu Dhabi 24?
Abu Dhabi 24. Was I in Abu Dhabi in 24?
It's all a blur.
Apologies if I have missed on that.
Sorry. I think you should take apologies that I wasn't on the pit wall, and that's it.
Abu Dhabi is the last race, yeah.
I think it is, yeah. Yeah, it usually is.
They did I didn't go to Abu Dhabi.
No, had you left the team by then, hadn't you, or not?
I left the team before the last race of 2024. Yeah.
There you go. Scott Brown. We'll make this the last question. We'll make this the last question because we're going to get on with the next show, and we've had a good run here in difficult circumstances. Not as difficult as Aston Martin-Honda in Bahrain this morning, but somewhere near it with the whole buffering drama. Scott Brown says, following up on the fuel flow limit you mentioned last time, regulations now energy flow of fuel rather than volume based. Would teams, well, that was actually Scarbs that was saying that, but anyway, that's the case. Would teams using high energy dense fuels have a weight advantage?
Yes, potentially.
That's a good point, isn't it?
Put less fuel in the tank, because it's a simple yes. Yeah. I mean, they don't have an advantage in terms of power because it is the energy that is being limited, the rate of energy supplied. But if you could get the same amount of energy into less fuel, then you would potentially have an advantage certainly in terms of volume. You could make the car a little bit smaller, potentially, or use that volume for something else. So there is a benefit to be had potentially, but I'd imagine the possibilities are probably very limited in terms of what you can actually do.
Right, finish with this one, and then we will have the next show, the Backstage Members Show, starting in about half an hour, 40 minutes. And we'll finish with this last comment, actually. Moonstar Productions. It's decision time right now. Get rid of Honda and move to a RBR or Merc power unit. That wouldn't be an easy thing to put. Are you allowed to do that mid-year once the season started anyway?
I suppose ultimately, theoretically, it may be possible, but it's impossible, really, from a team structural, contractual point of view. And it's the situation they've got. They need to knuckle down and fix it. Is what they need to do, and do whatever it takes to fix it. And it's a people issue as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Again, I would just say it just shows how hard it is to get things right, and it shows what a fantastic job those that do get it right have done to get themselves in that position. So, that's the name of the game.
Yep, it is indeed. Mark, thank you so much for your input. As sporadic as it was, but it's I think we got great audio, and also to you, the viewer, thank you for watching, for your questions and comments. Sorry we didn't get through all of them, but we will of course prioritize all comments that you make on YouTube chat in the next show going forward as well. But we're not going to be stopping these public live streams either, so don't despair. They will be here for you. And look forward to another live stream early next week. I'll schedule it. Watch this space. Until then, have a good weekend. Take care.